Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight's video has been graciously sponsored by Skillshare. This amazing platform offers a variety of online classes on literally anything you can think of and is taught by experts. Over the last week, I've actually been taking classes to improve my photography, and it's helped my skills immensely. If any of you want to take photography, I'm just saying, Justin Bridges' classes are really good, so be sure to check them out. If you've ever thought of learning a new skill or brushing up on something you do already, then this is seriously such a good learning opportunity. And you can take as many classes as you want. Go nuts, learn everything, that's what I'm trying to do. Now, if you want to partake in this awesome limited time offer, don't dally. You even get 2 months free trial to learn anything you want for free. So click the link in the description or the pinned comment to check it out. I really do recommend it, and I'm pretty sure you'll all love it. But without further ado, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. When I was very young, my grandmother had a painting that hung in the living room of her old house. This painting was of 2 women playing the piano, one playing while the other listened and pointed at the music, as if in the act of teaching the song. I would often sleep over at her house as a child. I have countless distinct memories of seeing the figures in the painting move at night, not in an intelligent way, but in a sort of acting out the scene sort of way. Almost like how a GIF is on the internet nowadays. Constant, looped actions. The woman playing the piano would begin to actually strike the keys and tap her foot to the rhythm, while the other woman would nod her head in approval or disapproval as she judged the performance. There was no sound. I was so young and saw the painting do this so often that I thought nothing of it, and accepted the idea that some paintings out there can move on their own. Decades later, I remembered the painting and noticed I hadn't seen it in many years. I asked my now very old grandmother about it, and she told me she had wrapped it in cloth and locked it away in her closet. I jokingly told her that as a child, I thought I saw the painting move at night. She went dead silent and said to me in a very serious tone, "My dear, why do you think I don't put it up anymore? Thanks for telling me you saw it too. I thought I was crazy all these years." This story is from the friend of my mum and her husband. They had just had their first baby and had bought an old house in the middle of nowhere in southwest Sweden. The husband worked at sea and was gone weeks at a time, leaving his wife and their newborn at home. It wasn't long after they moved in while he was away at sea that she started to feel uncomfortable in the house, like just a feeling that something was off. She started to get this sensation more and more, but like me, being a skeptic, she brushed it off as a feeling of loneliness since her husband was away. But then it evolved to more than just a feeling. That night, she thought she could hear footsteps on the stairs leading up to the 2nd floor, where she and the baby were asleep. She continued to try and convince herself that this also was something she imagined, half awake, half asleep, and tried to convince herself that it was an old house with wooden stairs, and that old houses make. But it continued almost every night, and she started to get a bit freaked out as soon as day turned to night. She would also notice the baby would focus on certain points in the ceiling and suddenly stop or start crying. More than newborns usually do, and more frequent flipping from crying to total silence, and a look of deep concentration while staring straight up, as if there was something there to focus on. The mother continued to try and explain the noises with rational thinking, and this being her first child, she tried to convince herself that it was normal behavior for a newborn, only a few weeks old anyway. Then one day in the middle of the day, When the kid was upstairs in the crib sleeping and her downstairs in the kitchen, did she hear footsteps on the stairs. Only this time they were really loud, and then a thud, as if someone had slammed the door. She just froze up until she heard her baby crying bloody murder. She ran up the stairs to not only find the door to the bedroom closed, something she never did so that she could hear the baby, but the baby was on the floor screaming. Remember, this baby is only a few weeks old. There's no way he could even sit up by himself, let alone climb out of a crib and crawl to the center of the room. After that, they sold the house and moved away. I've heard this story from the lady herself, and she's an honest and very good friend. I trust her very much, and after hearing this, I try to keep an open mind about the paranormal in the world. My father and I used to live in this Victorian-style house in northern central Wisconsin some years back. I lived in that house from ages 6 to 12 and have seen and heard some unexplainable stuff. I also wasn't the only one to see that. My father told me it was almost a daily thing for him at one point when I grew up. It was our first Thanksgiving dinner in the house. I was 7 at the time. My parents are divorced, but my father invited my mother to Thanksgiving dinner so that she wouldn't be alone. My grandmother also drove down from Upper Michigan to celebrate the holiday with us. We are just setting up the dinner table. My grandmother was on one side of the table and my mother was on the other. I was walking into the room when a coaster just gently glided across the dining room. Everyone stops, looks at me and asked if I threw the coaster like a frisbee. I was shocked and responded no. How can I throw it when my hands are full? At the time, I was carrying in the mashed potatoes. Everyone very slowly looks down, and I could see the shock and confused, scared look on their faces. They questioned me about it throughout the night. It freaked me out. The next event was when I was home alone one summer vacation when my father was gone at work. I was 9 years old at the time, sleeping in from a long night of TV. I woke up to the TV getting louder and louder. I could also hear people having a conversation in the living room, which is where the TV was. I walked downstairs calling for my dad and received no reply. And as I got down to about halfway down the stairs, the TV shut off. So I creep around and find no one home at all. I ran back upstairs and stayed in my bed until my dad came home from lunch. Another unexplained event happened a few weeks later. Father and I went out to go do some grocery shopping, and we were gone for a few hours or so. When we came back, we found all of the clocks in the house were all dead and stopped at different times. I honestly don't even know what happened. Then there's one more experience, when I was 11. I was downstairs in the basement home alone doing laundry and heard the back door open and close hard. Naturally, I thought my dad was home, and I walk up the basement stairs and hear a woman with heels walking on the hardwood floor. I also see a shadow cast under the door. As I got to the top, I opened the door to find no one in the house. I was cleaning up my workroom, which is kind of a shed outside with no windows and a workbench. I had placed my guitar leaning up against a wall while I cleaned and stumbled upon a Ouija board I had made. I'm not into it or anything, I don't believe in ghosts, it was just something I did for my friends, and because none of us had ever done it, we were curious. That's another story though, but I digress. I was standing with the Ouija board just kind of zoning out on it, when the guitar just went bong, like someone had hit the string or the guitar itself. It made the loudest noise. It was so loud that I screamed and jumped nearly out my pants with fear. I looked all around the room for close to an hour for anything that could have fallen on it, bumped it, or otherwise knocked the guitar, and nothing was out of place. I left everything as it was and showed my girlfriend, friends, and anyone I could to get to check it out, because I was going crazy over it. I still can't explain it. Even if something fell on the guitar, it had to have been something heavy and or metal based because of the sheer volume of noise that came out of this thing. I grew up in a small town in Maryland, right on the borders of Pennsylvania and Delaware. We moved into our neighborhood in 1974, and I was an infant. The builders had 3 styles you could choose from, and one being a pretty unique design. I always wished my parents would have picked that one. There is only one other neighborhood I know that must have been built by the same people. Across the border in Delaware, I've lived all over, and I've also had jobs as a cable installer, so I'm pretty familiar with most neighborhoods in the area and design and layout. Back in the early 60s, there was a plane crash that would have been a 10-minute walk from my house. Over 80 people passed during the incident. Pan Am Flight 214. Ghost stories and sightings were all part of my childhood, but not really related to what happened to me. My family moved to Virginia in 1991, and with the exception of one childhood friend, I had no ties with the area after that. I joined the military, and then I took a job out in Utah. After some strange life happenings, I had the opportunity to move my wife and young son back to this same small town. It was a great place to grow up. Well, it was back in the 80s, but there are so many problems there now. We didn't move to the same neighborhood, but rented an apartment not too far away, a couple of miles at most from my childhood home. My wife worked the midnight shift, and often my son would sleep in our bed when she was at work. He was around 5 at the time. It was somewhere around 11 p.m, and my son was in there fast asleep. I went in, and had just pulled him in close. I just love cuddling him. I really missed those times. I hadn't even turned on the TV yet. I'm one of those weirdos who has to have it on to fall asleep. I had just gotten underneath the covers. And as a kid, everyone called me Kenny. But everyone since high school called me Ken. Well, just as I was about to grab the remote and turn on the TV, I hear my name whispered. Kenny. I laid perfectly still for a few more minutes listening. I didn't even want to breathe. Did my wife come home? Beside her, very few people call me Kenny, and nobody within 1,500 miles. Maybe there are people outside and I could hear them. Did I leave the TV on in the living room? Birds? Upstairs neighbors? I finally relaxed. I mean, what could it be? Then it happened again. Kenny. This time a more forceful whisper, possibly agitated, possibly trying to get my attention but not wanting to wake up my son. The worst part? As it said my name, the hairs on the back of my head parted with its breath. Both my parents passed away in '97 in unrelated events. They never met their grandchildren, and I often wonder if my mother came to visit. I can't be 100% sure, but it sounded feminine, although very raspy. I've never been so afraid. I just knew if I rolled over, somebody would have been there. I must have laid there for hours before drifting off finally. I didn't tell a soul about this, not my wife, not my best friend, nobody. About 2 weeks go by and I had trained this guy at work. He became a pretty good friend at the time, and we learned we had extremely similar backstories. He grew up in the same house style I did in Delaware, and we also went to the same very small private school. People who grew up in the area don't even know it's there. There were only 13 other kids in my 8th grade class. Same car growing up, parents had similar backstories. It was a bit uncanny but nothing too crazy. Well, one night, we were hanging out and he said something to the effect of, "Please don't make fun of me, but I have something to tell you," and proceeded to tell me an almost identical tale of what happened to him. I'd never told anyone, and we have no idea if they are related. But he said he was laying in bed at 1 a.m. and someone whispered his name twice. He got up, looked around, had a smoke, and decided to just stay up for the rest of the night. Not sure what that means, or if the two events were related, but it really freaked us out. A year ago, my family moved into our new house that we're renting. I've had two odd experiences in two different rooms, one being very recent, the first being late winter. The first experience was very short, but freaky. I had wandered into my room and flopped onto my bed. I began playing with my tablet when I heard this horrendous noise. Something had dragged, something across the outer wall of my room. It sounded like a person taking a bone or nails and running it along the outer wall of my room. I ran over to my window and threw open the blinds, but nothing was there. My room at the time, since I switched recently, had no brush, trees or anything pressed against the house. What makes it scarier is that outside my room is a large tank that blocks part of the outer wall of my room. Something had somehow avoided that getting in the way. My second story happened a few days ago. I was home alone with my younger brother. We live in California and earthquakes are very frequent. I have a huge fear of them, which will explain my reaction. I was in my room lying in bed. I was awake checking my phone and was just too lazy to get up. My younger was playing Xbox in the living room, and I threw open YouTube and suddenly I'm nearly thrown off my bed. It was like an earthquake. My bed shook violently for a split second and nothing else in my room moved. But I didn't care at the time. I sprung up and ran to grab my brother when I noticed he was perfectly fine. He even looked at me like I was being weird, so I walked around the house and noticed nothing had changed. I was still so shaken up, I had to message a friend to get her to calm me down. I don't even know what happened. I worked for a title company that required me to travel to people's homes and execute loan transfers from one bank to another. Most of the time, the homes were within a 50-mile radius of the office, but on rare occasions it did require me to travel further. This is the time I met someone/something I can't comprehend. I am a completely sane individual, and I like to think that I have a good grip on reality. This closing I was driving to was in eastern Ohio, maybe 30 miles from the Pennsylvania border, and it was in the middle of nowhere. This was over 10 years ago, before smartphones and Google Maps were a thing, where I needed to rely on printed directions via MapQuest. For this closing, MapQuest gave me directions, but a vague idea to where the actual home was located. In situations like this, I would typically get as close as possible, stop at a gas station and ask for directions, and then continue. However, this time I couldn't find a gas station, market, library, nothing. This was during the middle of the day in late summer, and I was in no rush, so I took my time. Going through this hilly valley, a very beautiful part of Ohio, looking for a certain intersection. I made a handful of passes throughout this town, but no luck, and turned around once again. When I was making my return, I spotted an old bearded man on the side of the road, sitting on a rock minding his own business. It was just him and I who were on the road. I pulled over, rolled my window down and asked him for help. He smiled, never getting up off his rock that he was resting on, looked at me in the eyes and gave me instructions and pointed where to go with his cane. Except he spoke to me in some language. I can't place it. It wasn't Spanish, German, French or Slavic languages. It was like tongues. I just nodded, said thanks and pretended like I understood. Eventually I made it to the next town and found my way. I wasn't spooked, but later, at the closing, when I shared this story with the client, I was informed I possibly met this elusive figure that had been spotted in the surrounding area. He's been known to wave to people and then disappear, but no one has ever spoken to him before me. How lucky. I have reactive attachment disorder, and as a result I struggle with severe depression. However, I don't want to take any medication. I say that because I was going through one of the worst bouts of depression I've had in about a year and a half, and I wasn't hallucinating because of medication. It was Tuesday night or Wednesday morning, October 13th to 14th. I'd cried myself to sleep like I had for however many hours before. When I woke up, it was 3:34. My cat Betty was walking around on the bed, and for some reason the alarm on my phone was going off. I use the Sleep Cycle app, and it was going off although the alarm wasn't set until 5:30 to 6. So I'm frustrated that it's decided to stop working correctly. Then I hear that my computer in the living room turns on. I thought my other cat, Vader, must have knocked the mouse walking over the desk. Then I see the light turn on from the monitor. What? I thought. I was kind of pissed, so I started grumbling. Damn cats, Betty stomping all around and Vader turning stuff on. Until I turned on the bedside lamp. Both cats are laying at the end of my bed, looking into the living room. I froze. I was so confused. I was trying to make sense of it when I heard my front door open, like this screen door first, and then the front doorknob, and then I heard it move across the carpet. Unlike the movies, I jumped out of bed as quietly as possible, wondering how the hell someone was coming into our apartment, as I was sure I'd locked the door. I silently stepped into the hall and peeked around the corner. My cats nonchalantly decided it was time to ignore the obvious murderer entering our home. I peek around the corner, and the door is closed. The lights are off, the monitor is off, but I can hear the computer running. I stood there for who knows how long. I still can't make sense of it. I couldn't sleep the rest of the night. It wasn't a dream. Maybe I was sleepwalking. I don't know. But I've never been afraid in my apartment, and at that moment I felt very afraid, and very much not alone. It hasn't happened again. I just don't know. My wife and I traveled to South Africa a few months ago, and spent some time in Kruger National Park. The first night we stayed at one of the less developed camps, which was definitely cooler than the more built-up ones that felt like smaller cities, called Biamiti. It was around 9:30 or so, and we had just returned from a guided sunset drive. I was with the wife out on the patio, drinking a glass of wine and enjoying the sounds of nature, when my body told me that I was ready to rid myself of that wonderful airplane food I had eaten earlier. The cottage that we were staying at had a living room, bedroom, and bathroom. The bathroom had 2 doors and was accessible from either room. The door going into the bedroom must have been a bit warped because it didn't really play nice when you closed it. Knowing that I was about to unleash some hell, I made damn sure that the door was completely closed and the latch engaged. So there I am, sitting atop my porcelain throne, with cell phone in hand playing some forgettable game while I did my business. As I finish part 1 of this 2-step, I see the bedroom door handle moving down, and the door swings open about 4 inches. Now I have a history of turning bathrooms into a disaster zone, so my wife knows to stay far away while I'm on the can. Hello? I mutter vulnerably. It's hard to feel like a badass when you're on the cam with your shorts around your ankles. There's no response. So the wife must be messing with me. She has to be. I saw the handle move downwards. At this point, the goosebumps have kicked in, and my heart starts beating like a bass drum. I hastily make with the toilet paper and head back to the patio. "Why did you open the door while I was pooping?" My wife replies, "What are you talking about? Are you kidding me?" "No, that's the last place I'd want to be." "You're really not kidding with me?" "No." I sit down with some more wine, still wondering what actually happened, and could not come up with a reasonable explanation. Needless to say, we slept with a light on in the living room, like a couple of children, in case Ghosty decided to come back. I grew up around my grandmother in her century-old farmhouse in deep South Texas. She was the oldest daughter to Hungarian immigrant parents. I remember being told by very serious adults that she was different. She'd use playing cards and tell people's fortunes, but she'd be very specific, like that you'd be in a car accident because the red truck in front of you had its rear left tire blown out and you'll break your arm. I was also told that they would call her to tell her about something, and she'd know about it already, even though there was no possible way. In the middle of this, 3 sets of bones were discovered on the property, identified as migrants and several decades old. That's when things got weird. Faces started appearing in reflections on glass, even though no one was there to cast them. Things would move around in the kitchen and bathroom. Sounds of walking would be heard when everyone was sitting. Howling winds could be heard when the night was without a breeze. What haunted me into adulthood was the closet. The fan control was in the closet, and I'd often leave it open on my way to the bed. One night I was having trouble sleeping, but my attention became locked on the closet. That's when someone walked out, around the foot of the bed, and out the far door into the music room. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I have never been so scared before or since. I got up, closed both doors, and kept all doors closed around me as I sleep, even now. I told my grandmother what happened, who called a Catholic priest who she knew. The 2 of them performed an exorcism, and things improved. But I can't fathom what happened. I know she was a special woman. I know what happened has no explanation, and I keep trying to tell myself that I'll be happier sticking my head in the sand. This happened when I was around 7 or 8 years old, but I remember it very clearly. Just some background. Our family is religious and are Catholic. I was playing Jenga with my siblings and cousins. It was getting really late, maybe 12 AM to 1 AM. My mum didn't know that we were still up and playing, but when she woke up in the middle of the night and told us to go to sleep, we said that we weren't sleepy. To that she replied, "El diablo va a aparecer." In other words, the devil is going to appear. She was trying to scare us to put it away, but of course we didn't listen. Now my mum has always told us that ghosts are real and that she believes highly in them but is not afraid. She has told us countless stories of her experiences. Anyway, I don't know, but all stopped playing because we heard something. We all listened, and sure enough, the sound was easy to make out. The distinct sound of chains dragging a horse walking. This was right outside our home. It was like whatever the hell it was wanted us to know that it was outside because it went on for at least 45 seconds. Now keep in mind that we didn't live in an area where you can hear horses. We lived 2 blocks away from a major freeway in Los Angeles. Now I'm not crazy and I'm not imagining this because everyone that lived in my house heard it. Sure enough, my mum comes out and says, "I told you so." Sure enough, none of us were able to sleep that night. Luckily I was young, so sleeping with my parents was acceptable, but my sister was inconsolable. If ghosts are real, I grew up with one in my house. It would regularly torture my dog, in that she would frequently yelp and cry in the other room, and hightail it the hell out of there before anything shifty would happen in mine. For clarity, my mother worked night shift, and I was the only one home. While there was always stuff a bit off, like TVs turning off, the volume changing by itself, and sounds of things falling in the kitchen, but then nothing being down there when you check it out, the one thing that still gets me is when I saw a metal candlestick holder sitting on my side drawer fly from one side of the drawer to the other, hard enough to make a noise as it slammed against the side. My second drawer was hanging open, and it flew from right to left. I still can't wrap my mind around it. It's been a very long time since anything strange has happened, and the more time that passes, the more I feel further removed from it, having been a reality. It absolutely happened though. I rarely talk about it though, because it can't be explained, and tends to make me feel uneasy, and that I lose credibility with others. I was a busser at a restaurant in Philadelphia during undergraduate school. We had an upstairs bar, and most of the restaurant was on the ground floor. I was working a Friday night once, and we closed around midnight. Early for a bar, but most of our sales were from food. The bartender went back to do bills and whatnot, and I was mopping the upstairs floor near the bar. All of the lights were on, front door locked, and I could hear people on the street outside. Nothing scary. When I heard the front door open and slam, I figured it was our bartender. I look at the stairs and see a guy walk up. I stop mopping and wonder who it is. I'd been working there for 6 months, so I knew all the staff, but I didn't recognize the guy, but figured he was a new dishwasher or something, and clearly had keys to unlock the door. As I'm staring at him, he turns and looks at me, smiles, but keeps walking and heading to the back. I shrug and figure he's going to the office, which is upstairs through the back door, right where he's going. I continue to mop, and the bartender comes out 20 minutes later. I asked who came in. "Nobody," he says. I swear I saw the guy. He checked the front door and it was locked. We searched all over the restaurant and basement. There was no one. Even after reviewing the security camera, there was nothing. To this day, I chalk it up to hallucinating, but I wasn't on any drugs, was healthy, and was neither tired nor hungry. He did have a nice smile though, and it's what I remember most, just a huge, friendly, goofy grin. We moved into a house, and everything was really quiet for the first 6 months or so. The neighbors told us that the people who lived there before had moved after their teenage son died in a motorcycle accident. Then after the first 6 months, my dad died, not in the house, and after that, stuff started to happen. I would have friends sleep over, and one night my friend woke me up because she said there was a young guy standing in my bathroom. So I went and checked, and there was nothing. Over the next few years, just about any friends that stayed over at night had said they saw a small, tall, blonde guy walking around the house. We did have a few other things happen, like a wine glass was on the counter and it broke, with no one touching it. It just shattered on the counter. Another time during the winter, we had the heater on and my room was always the warmest in the house, and it was ice cold as you walked across my bedroom to the bathroom that was connected. The creepiest thing was when my boyfriend was sleeping on the couch in the middle of the night, and he said he woke up to a young guy pushing him off onto the floor. He said the guy didn't say anything, but my boyfriend at the time knew that he had to leave, and he did. He wouldn't stay at my place after that either. Just to go into further detail about the glass, my mum had a collection of glassware. She had so many that there weren't many places to put them anymore, so we just set them on the counter. The wine glass had been sitting there untouched for a long time. It hadn't just come out the dishwasher or anything like that. She just put it on the counter, and there it stayed. When it broke, no one was near, only me and my mum were there, and we were both 10 feet away at least. Could it have been something like a crack in the glass? Maybe. But at the time it startled us, and we thought it was bizarre. A few years ago, I was driving back to my house from a friend's house at 2 a.m. I was getting close to my house in a really rural area with cornfields on both sides of the road. All of a sudden, I saw stalks of corn blocking my path, going straight across the road from one field to another. Nobody was around, there were no cars, no houses, and just my headlights were shining on upright corn stalks standing across the road, as thick as the fields on either side. I knew I wasn't lost or anything. I drove home this way every day and stopped the car on the road and just staring at the cornstalks trying to figure out what the hell to do. After sitting there for a minute, I decided that staring at the corn waiting for something to happen was much scarier than doing something. So I hit the gas hoping the corn would just fall down in front of my small car. It was one of the strangest feelings driving through the corn. I imagine it is what it would feel like to run through platform 9 3/4 of Harry Potter. 1 second, I was staring at what seemed to be a solid cornfield, and the next, my car is easily knocking the stalks over as I was through. The rows of corn across the road weren't as deep as I had thought, and in no time I was on the other side, looking in the rearview mirror at the wall of corn with now a gaping hole in it. I went home, went to bed still freaked out. The next morning I went to leave, drove down the same road, and the only sign of the corn were a few stalks laying next to the road. I still have no idea how that happened, but the corn was gone by morning. It must have been ghost corn. This past summer of 2018, I would sneak out at night. An hour after I would sneak back into my bedroom, a light would shine through my window, almost like it was scanning my window. It was not a car passing by. It seemed like a flashlight shining in. The background of the light was pitch black outside. It usually isn't that dark. I look out after the light has passed, and I wouldn't see anything in front of my actual window. There is a glass storm window to protect my actual window from storms. On a particular night, it wasn't like the other nights when the light would shine. The light shined through my window, and then all of a sudden I heard something rattling my storm window as if it was trying to break in. I look out and see nothing. After I stopped sneaking out in the summer, the light would stop. A few days ago I did not sneak out at night, and I saw a light shining through my window scanning them. Has anyone else experienced anything remotely similar to this? When I was around 10 or 11, I lived in this small town in Missouri. Well, I always thought my house was haunted, but I could never get proof to show my mum. One night I was laying in my room with my door closed, and I just couldn't go to sleep. Keep in mind that my room is on the other side of the house, but my front door is very loud. To picture this moment better, you have to have an understanding of my old home. When you walk in the house from the front door, there is an open living room, dining room and kitchen. Then you go down this long hallway and there are rooms and bathrooms, and the bedroom is on the right, and across from that is my older brother Zach's room, who was at college at this time. Then on the same side of Zach's room is my mother's room. Then right across from hers is my room, then a closet at the end of the hallway. Well, I was laying in bed and Zach had come home from work, and he was already asleep as I could hear him snoring. And all of a sudden, I hear slow footsteps coming down the hallways. It sounded like they started at the front of the hallway, and they sound like big boots. While I'm freaking out, I could hear it come right in front of my door. Then I heard my mum cough and then turn over. Right as she did, the footsteps stopped and turned back around, and slowly walked down the hallway and disappeared at the front of the hallway. Whoever it was never opened a door or window, because my house is pretty old. Another time, a few months after the incident, my mum was actually watching TV in the living room, and I was about to fall asleep, when all of a sudden I heard, "Get out," right by my ear. I could even feel the hotness on my ear, and it sounded like a little girl. Then, I just kept my eyes closed for 30 seconds and yelled for my mother. Another time something like that happened was when I was in my mum's room laying down, and all of a sudden I hear a man's voice in the same room as me. My father didn't live with me at the time, and Zach was at work. I couldn't make out what he said, but it obviously freaked me out. I live about 3 hours away from there now, and nothing has happened. I hope nothing more does occur. This happened to me last summer, when I was back at my parents' house during the holidays. It was around 3 a.m, and I was in my room on my computer when I got a call from my sister. Now, that was already a little bit weird, since my sister's room is just down the hallway from mine, and she could have just come into my room. I went to pick it up, and the call ended as soon as I reached for the phone. I figured that she just wanted to speak with me, so I got up and went to her room. As soon as I reached the door, she started screaming that someone was in the room with her, so I busted in, and no one was there. After she stopped crying, she told me that she woke up and saw a dark shadow just centimeters from her face, and that's when she screamed. So I told her that she called me, and she said that her phone isn't in her room, and that she was sleeping. Sure enough, her phone was actually downstairs in her purse. The weirdest part is that I have the log of her call on my phone, but she does not. We've never been able to explain that one away. If you grow up in England, there's a story that you might hear. One of the old legends that's all but died out in our modern era. It isn't popular anymore, but the tale of the Church Grim still gets whispered around the fires at night and told in hushed tones to curious children. While it isn't as bloody or monstrous as some stories, its power comes from how real it is. The Church Grim is a spirit that oversees the welfare of the church where it was buried, and it helps protect the churchyard from vandals and robbers. Whenever a new graveyard was buried, it was believed that the first person buried there had to spend eternity guarding the other souls from evil. So in order to prevent a human from shouldering this burden, a stray black dog was sacrificed. The Grim was also said to ring church bells the night before a villager died, and they're associated with bringing bad luck to whoever spots one. They often appear as black dogs with red eyes, but other animals such as pigs and lambs have also been used as guardians of the church. There are countless records of people encountering this type of spirit, and even some of the most devout, honest churchgoers have sworn they have seen it. When I was 8, my grandma told me all of this, which had been passed down from her family who came to the United States from Tewkesbury, England. I'm now ashamed to admit it, but back then I didn't believe her. I called her a liar and told her the ghosts aren't real. I remember how sad she looked at me. I wish I had trusted her words, but I guess I had to learn my lesson the hard way. One night, not long after I turned 17, I was coming back from my boyfriend Max's house. A thick blanket of dark clouds had gathered that night, and I was hurrying so that I wouldn't get caught in the storm. Mist had started to creep across the ground, and I was trying to not trip when I heard a whimper. The noise was most definitely coming from inside the graveyard, which nearly made me decide not to go in. There had been a string of people finished in this area lately by some unknown assailant, and since I didn't have any form of protection on me, I didn't want to get caught alone and meet their sticky end as well. Then the sound came again, and my heart twisted. I couldn't just ignore an animal that was in trouble, so I took a nervous breath and pushed open the wrought iron gate. I cringed as the hinges squeaked, but I resolutely continued forward. I called quietly to the dog as I weaved among the headstones, but in the gathering mist, my foam flashlight wasn't doing me much good. I thought I saw its eyes glinting once, but it was just the jeweled eyes of a doll leaning up against a headstone. I was about to abandon my search, especially since my thin sneakers were beginning to soak through, when I saw a little black puppy. It was curled up next to an unmarked gravestone in the furthest corner of the graveyard, and even 10 feet away from it I could see it shivering. I called out to it and smiled as it perked its ears towards me. "Hey little pup, come here." My voice carried the excited tone that most dogs love, but the puppy ignored me. I moved in closer, and when it didn't try to run away, I gently scooped it up. It let out another whimper, and I began checking it over since it sounded like it could be hurt. As I was examining it, I noticed that it was wearing a raggedy old collar with a tag, and apparently his name was Kirk. He seemed fine, and he had even given me a friendly, tentative lick. "Hey Kirk, it's okay boy. I'm gonna bring you home with me, then tomorrow I'll figure out where you live and get you home." He gave me a happy little woof, and I could almost believe that he understood me. I was about to turn around and head for the gate, when Kirk jumped out of my arms, his hackles raised. I didn't see anything, but I heard the hushed sounds of voices. I quickly shut off my light, scuttling quietly over to a larger gravestone to try and hide myself. I paused carefully, not to make a sound, as I panicked as the voices became clearer. "Are you sure she's there?" "Yeah, definitely. Saw her light over that way." "When we catch her, gonna make sure she can't sit for a week. Then we cut her throat. Slice her up just like the others." I had heard enough. I needed to get out of there, and I frantically tried to get Kirk's attention. He wouldn't turn his head though, and his hackles were slowly rising. I was starting to shake, but before I could move to pick him up, his eyes began glowing. I halted, my hand outstretched towards him, and I blinked rapidly. At first I thought I was imagining things, or that the two men had some sort of red light that I was seeing, but I quickly ruled out those possibilities. Kirk's eyes were glowing a ruby red in the darkness, and no amount of blinking was making it change. "Kirk?" My voice sounded tiny, and for a moment, I had regressed to my 5-year-old self, when I believed there was a monster under my bed. I hadn't believed in the paranormal for 12 years, so this was kicking me pretty far out of my comfort zone. I was still down on my knees, my hands outstretched, when Kirk began growling. I could see him as well, but I watched as the level of his eyes began to rise, and he let out a bone-chilling howl, and I could hear the anger and sadness woven into it. As the last note faded into the mist, I heard one of the men let out a surprised shout as Kirk bounded towards them. I quickly lost sight of him, but I could hear the anguished screams and the sounds of tearing flesh coming from the men. One of them shot a gun, but either they missed or it had no effect on Kirk. About 5 minutes ticked by, each one feeling slower than the last, before I heard Kirk coming back to me. I turned my flashlight on instantly, regretting my decision. Kirk had returned to his puppy form, but he was dragging an arm with him like it was a stick. He dropped the macabre gift at my feet, crouching down and waggling his little tail playfully. I half laughed and half sobbed, and before I could think, I picked him up and hugged him. I realized I wasn't afraid of him at all, and my grandma's words about not judging a book by its cover crossed my mind. "Thank you, good boy. Thank you so much." He licked the tears that were streaming down my cheeks until I stopped crying, and he nudged his head against mine with a happy woof. I sat him back down, then pulled myself unsteadily to my feet with the help of the headstone. I was still trembling, but I was able to step carefully over the arm and get myself past the bodies without vomiting. Kirk followed me, weaving playfully around my ankles like he was herding a sheep. When I reached the gate, he stopped, whining sadly as I passed through the wrought iron. I looked back at him and wondered what would happen if he passed through. Could he even do it? I realized Kirk wasn't a typical dog, but this didn't stop me from wanting to take care of him. I figured it was worth a shot, and in the worst case scenario, he would remain trapped here. I squatted down, clapping my hands together excitedly to call me to him. "Kirk, come here, boy, come on." He ran towards me, wagging his tail. Just as he hit the line of the gate, he crumpled, and it looked like he had slammed head first into an invisible wall. I felt my heart wrench painfully, and I wanted him to be able to leave his phantasmal prison. I walked over to him, picking him up and gently cradling him in my chest. He felt so solid and so alive, and even knowing what he was, I couldn't bring myself to abandon my little hero. His loneliness was palatable when I first saw him, and I didn't want him stuck like this. I carried him to the gate, stopping just shy of the threshold, and I had no idea what to do. But a memory came floating back to me. My grandpa had been a preacher, and I recalled how he said during one of his sermons that sometimes spirits just need someone to tell them it was okay to be free. I knew that I was risking the chance that Kirk could simply disappear, but I wanted him to be free. I took a breath. "Kirk, I release you from your spirit guardian duties. You are free to travel wherever you want." My voice had gained confidence as I spoke, and by the end I was sweeping an arm out in a hand gesture, as though I could make the gate allow Kirk to pass through by sheer force of will. He had held practically still this whole time, and he hadn't even tried to squirm around or jump down like a normal puppy. I looked down at his furry little face, closed my eyes, and took a step forward. When I opened them, I was on the other side of the gate, but my arms were empty. I spun around, but Kirk wasn't on the other side. I called to him and checked inside the graveyard, but couldn't find him. My shoulders drooped as I let out a defeated sigh and began walking home, my soaked sneakers making a sad squish sound as I made my way through 1.5 miles of near darkness. My phone had died at some point, but I knew the route well enough that I could still navigate it just fine. I finally caught sight of my apartment stop, and sitting on the topmost step was a little black puppy. It was Kirk. I ran up to him, and he barked excitedly. As I went to reach for him, he jumped, landing in my arms in an ungraceful wiggling ball of fur. That night was now 4 years ago, and every once in a while Kirk gives me a special bark to let me know that he has to go and take care of some business. My daughter Celia loves him, and he likes to watch over her as she learns to walk. Max and I have a bit of an odd family, but we wouldn't change it for the world. My name is Diego. Me and my girlfriend have a few problems. We live in a house together with 4 cats, but over the last few months, stuff randomly disappears. Today this morning, I searched for my money because I left it in my jacket, but it wasn't there, and it was nowhere else to be found. It's the second time that this has happened, and we had the same problem that money disappeared and we didn't find it. And our cats are randomly meowing towards walls, to things that aren't there. They are peeing on random places even though we did help them, so we don't think that's the problem. Sometimes late at night, my cat meows to the hallway even if there's nothing there. A year back, she told me that when she had a Christmas card from her sister, she stuck it to her door, but that night the card turned 180 degrees and fell down from the door. She told me later that her mum passed away and that perhaps this was her doing, but that's hard to say. And I'm now experiencing lots of nightmares every week, and those are terrifying. It wakes me up at night, and I always stare into a corner, even though there's nothing there. This morning, me and my girlfriend were fighting about this as it's driving us crazy, and we don't know what to do, because she thinks it's a poltergeist that's annoying us, but it's hard to say because you can't prove it. And, honestly, I could just use with some help. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so very much for listening. I do hope that you enjoyed tonight's stories. Seriously, don't forget to check out Skillshare. It is amazing. I really do recommend it. The link is in the description and the pinned comment. And 2-month free trial. Just give it a go. It's so good. But anyway, if you liked the video, don't forget to drop a like, leave a comment with your thoughts, as that always goes a long way and really helps me out. Special thanks to each and every patron who helps me make the content that you enjoy. You can find the link to Patreon if you are so interested in the description, and as always, contributing means a hell of a lot. If there's a story that you would like shared or read, feel free to forward it to my email or drop it to my Reddit page. Either are fine, and hopefully I'll be able to put it into a video soon. But anyway, for now guys, I'm gonna sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.